we're not against you, we're against your policies. The American people have rejected your agenda, and now you're trying to go around it. That's not right. It's not constitutional, and we are going to kick your rear end out of the White House come this fall.
Hillary Clinton would be a national security disaster. If she gets elected, her first 100 days, instead of setting an agenda, she might be going back and forth between the White House and the courthouse. We need to stop that.
We can't be the stupid country anymore.
You know, I think most people know exactly what New York values are. Everyone understands that the values in New York City are socially liberal or pro-abortion or pro-gay marriage, focused around money and the media.
Bernie Sanders is the nominee. That's not even an issue. And I know Bernie, and I can promise you he's not going to be president of the United States.
Neil, I was mentioned too.
You were?
Yeah, I said everybody.
Oh.
That was just a taste of what happened last night in South Carolina as the Republicans battled it out in the first debate of the year. Hi, everyone. I'm Meg Oliver.
And I'm Elaine Quijano. Last night's debate really seemed to have it all. Bromances ending, new battle lines forming, and lots of questions about who the top 3 Republican candidates are going into Iowa.
We've got you covered from every angle. Our senior political editor, Steve Chaggaris, is with us here in New York. And in Washington, we've got Jonathan Swanson, a national political reporter at The Hill.
Thank you both for being with us. We'll talk to those two in just a moment, but first, let's go down to South Carolina and Major Garrett.
There's a big question mark on your head.
Birtherism, prime-time Republican style.
There are other attorneys that feel, and very, very fine constitutional attorneys, that feel that because he was not born on the land, he cannot run for office.
Well, listen, I've spent my entire life defending the Constitution before the U.S. Supreme Court, and I'll tell you, I'm not going to be taking legal advice from Donald Trump.
You don't have to. Take
with comic relief.
I hate to interrupt this episode of Court TV, but the real...
Less than 3 weeks before the first nominating votes are cast, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz are fighting for the lead in Iowa. The two squared off over Cruz's definition of Trump's so-called New York values.
The values in New York City are socially liberal or pro-abortion or pro-gay marriage, focused around money and the media.
When the World Trade Center came down, I saw something that no place on earth could have handled more beautifully, and I have to tell you, that was a very insulting statement that Ted made.
Trump also defended his call to ban all Muslims from entering the U.S.
I said temporarily. I didn't say permanently.
That drew a sharp rebuke from Jeb Bush.
But all Muslims? Seriously? What kind of signals does that send to the rest of the world?
Marco Rubio clashed with Christie.
Unfortunately, Governor Christie has endorsed many of the ideas that Barack Obama supports.
2 years ago, he called me a conservative reformer that New Jersey needed.
And with Cruz.
I saw you on the Senate floor flip your vote on crop insurance because they told you it would help you in Iowa. That is not consistent conservatism. That is political calculation.
After the debate, Trump expressed confidence about his chances in the caucuses on February 1st, but acknowledged nothing is guaranteed.
You know, it's interesting. When people wait in line for 5 hours to go to a rally, I would imagine they'd show up to caucus in the case of Iowa.
We want to bring in Steve Chaggaris and Jonathan Swanson. Thank you so much for both being here. Steve, I want to start with you. Some big moments last night, but we saw a big battle brewing between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. What'd you make of that?
Well, it's what we've all been waiting for, at least in the last couple of months, as Cruz took the lead in Iowa. And so we were waiting to see how they were going to play off each other, but also was Cruz going to start going after Donald Trump? And I think you did see some of that. That New York moment was a clear example of where Ted Cruz tried to go on offense. The question was sort of teed up for him, and then he answered the question, went on offense, basically accusing Donald Trump of not being a Republican, a conservative, and a liberal from being from New York. And as you saw, Trump's response really sort of shut down that argument.
Well, let's go in a little deeper, and we want to play that exchange out just so you can hear it in full. Let's take a listen to that.
This president is undermining the constitutional basis of this government. This president is undermining our military. He's undermining our standing in the world. I like Chris Christie, but we cannot afford to have a president of the United States that supports Common Core. We cannot afford to have a president of the United States that supports gun control.
Is he a liberal?
Unfortunately, Governor Christie has endorsed many of the ideas that Barack Obama supports, whether it's Common Core or gun control or the appointment of Sonia Sotomayor or the donation he made to Planned Parenthood. Our next president and our Republican nominee cannot be someone who supports those positions.
I stood on the stage and watched Marco and rather indignantly look at Governor Bush and say, someone told you that because we're running for the same office, that criticizing me will get you to that office. It appears that the same someone's been whispering in old Marco's ear, too. This is the difference between being a governor and being a senator. See, when you're a senator, what you get to do is just talk and talk and talk, and you talk so much that nobody can ever keep up with what you're saying is accurate or not. When you're a governor, you're held accountable for everything you do. And the people of New Jersey have seen it. And the last piece is this. I like Marco, too. And 2 years ago, he called me a conservative reformer that New Jersey needed. That was before he was running against me. Now that he is, he's changed his tune. I'm never going to change my tune. I like Marco Rubio. He's a good guy, a smart guy, and he would be a heck of a lot better president than Hillary Rodham Clinton would ever be.
Okay, clearly that was not Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, but it was another big moment, Steve, between Chris Christie and Marco Rubio, who was going after him. Break that down for us.
Well, so the other thing I was looking for last night was this fight among basically for third place, right? So you've got Rubio and Christie and Jeb Bush and John Kasich all, bunched up together in New Hampshire, and who's really going to emerge from them as the alternative to Cruz and Trump? And it was an interesting back and forth. Christie's had a little bit of momentum in New Hampshire recently, and Rubio has as well. And it was interesting to watch Rubio go after Christie, because really Rubio's been sort of the happy warrior here in all these debates. I think you ask anybody who watches these debates, they say Rubio is a good performer, he's a great debater, but he's had this sort of optimistic view of what the future should be for the country and for Republicans. And he really came out on the attack, especially against Christie in that back and forth. And Christie, he held his own. Again, Christie's a guy who is he has shades of Donald Trump, as he's not going to take anything from anybody. He's going to hit right back. The questions that I think remain, though, among Republican voters are these guys really good enough to be our nominee? I think there's a lot of questions about where they are on certain issues between Christie and Rubio. Are they conservative enough? And so those are the issues they're going to have to deal with. You heard Rubio really sort of hit Christie on some of that stuff last night.
Jonathan, I want to turn to you. Going back to the Donald Trump-Ted Cruz back and forth, that was such a fascinating dynamic. And for our viewers who might have missed it, we want to go ahead right now and play that fuller exchange when it comes to New York values. There's been a lot of talk today about whether or not that line of attack backfired on Senator Cruz. Let's listen to that.
I think most people know exactly what New York values are.
I am from New York.
You're from New York, so you might not. But I promise you, in the state of South Carolina, they do. And listen, there are many, many wonderful, wonderful working men and women in the state of New York. But everyone understands that the values in New York City are socially liberal or pro-abortion or pro-gay marriage, focused around money and the media. The concept of New York values is not that complicated to figure out. Not too many years ago, Donald did a long interview with Tim Russert. And in that interview, he explained his views on a whole host of issues that were very, very different from the views he's describing now. And his explanation, he said, look, I'm from New York. That's what we believe in New York. Those aren't Iowa values, but this is what we believe in New York. And so that was his explanation.
New York is a great place. It's got great people. It's got loving people, wonderful people. When the World Trade Center came down, I saw something that no place on earth could have handled more beautifully, more humanely than New York. You're two 110-story buildings come crashing down. I saw them come down. Thousands of people killed. And the cleanup started the next day, and it was the most horrific cleanup probably in the history of doing this and in construction. I was down there, and I've never seen anything like it. And the people in New York fought and fought and fought, and we saw more death, and even the smell of death. Nobody understood it, and it was with us for months. the smell, the air, and we rebuilt downtown Manhattan. And everybody in the world watched, and everybody in the world loved New York and loved New Yorkers. And I have to tell you, that was a very insulting statement that Ted made.
Jonathan, what's your take on that?
Well, I think you saw two things there. One is that Ted Cruz, who has avoided attacking Donald Trump the entire campaign, he's enjoyed watching others in the Republican field take him on, people like Rick Perry, and they've fallen by the wayside. But he's obviously worried now. He took the lead in Iowa a week or two ago in the polls, and then Donald Trump has actually wrestled back the lead. I mean, it's within a margin of error now, but the birther theme that Donald Trump has been pushing seems to have rattled Ted Cruz a little bit, and he's made a strategic decision to attack Donald Trump. And obviously that was just a direct channel to Iowa voters, Christian evangelicals saying, he's not one of you. This is a guy who in the past has been pro-abortion, so you can't trust him on these social issues. So that's what Cruz was doing there. But I think what you saw there with Donald Trump was a very, very gifted politician. I mean, you saw it. His response forced Ted Cruz to clap along sort of sheepishly with the audience. I mean, that was pretty powerful. We saw in the Democrat debate, the first one, when Hillary Clinton was under real pressure from Bernie Sanders about her Wall Street donations, she invoked 9/11, and that was seen as a very inappropriate use of 9/11. But I think the consensus in the room and certainly among the media was that Donald Trump used that quite brilliantly last night.
Overnight, the New York Daily News, they tweeted out a possible front page that would have said "Drop Dead Ted." They ended up putting it, and there is their possible front page, but they actually ended up putting it in the middle of the paper. It says, "Drop Dead Ted, don't rip city, then come beg for cash." Steve, I want to get your take on it because it's definitely a Donald Trump we have not seen.
Yeah, I want to go back to the Cruz part of this, though. I mean, the way the question was teed up, you could see it on Cruz's face as somebody who has been brilliant at sort of pushing the right buttons on conservative messages. He thought he had a grand slam here, calling Donald Trump a liberal. That's what New Yorkers are. And you could see it on his face. He was so, after really spending a lot of time on defense last night, he thought that was his moment. And I don't think he expected the response. I don't think anybody expected the response that Donald Trump gave. The response I think anybody else would have given to that charge would have been, well, you, Ted Cruz, are going to New York and you're raising money from these same people that you're criticizing as being liberal, and you're saying things behind closed doors that aren't in line with conservative values, and you're just as bad as Donald Trump here. That would have been the normal response. And I think that's what we all expected to happen. And instead, Donald Trump comes out with this very soft-spoken, heartfelt look at what happened on 9/11. I don't think anybody expected that. We don't ever see this from Donald Trump. He's turned the page, I think, at least with that response, into how he's sort of approaching this campaign. Not every answer is going to be, I'm going to slice you because you cut me first.
I mean, what does that tell you about his evolution that is happening before our eyes? The evolution of Donald Trump as a presidential candidate, because there was a time when, as you point out, this is not the response that anyone would have expected from Donald Trump when hit. You know, in the past, he's hit back even harder. So this was different.
It was always scorched earth with Donald Trump, right? And then he would say these things, you get criticized. I think there are moments now where he sort of realizes, and you saw a little bit when he was on Fallon earlier this week, there are times when he can be a little bit more subdued or just, you know, calmer than the average Donald Trump response. And I don't know if this is a direct effect on this, but I think you're starting to see some Republicans looking at him and saying, wow, this guy could actually be our nominee, and we might be comfortable with this guy. There was a poll from NBC that came out yesterday where a majority of Republicans say they could see themselves supporting Donald Trump. Why is that interesting? Because last year at this time, it was a large majority could not see that. And so he's sort of turned this a little bit.
Jonathan, I want to ask you, right toward the end of the debate, it was almost over, and there we saw Senator Marco Rubio come out swinging against Ted Cruz, calling him out for flip-flopping on several different issues. How effective was that?
Well, obviously, Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz have been in a clash for several weeks now, and Ted Cruz has really, throughout this campaign, his theory of the race is that you don't actually need to appeal to everyone, you need to excite the base. So he's been positioning himself as a purist, the consistent conservative, the conservative you can trust. And we saw it last night on guns, for example. Everyone gave a statement about, worshipping the Second Amendment, but Cruz said, I'm the one who stood up for it. And so what Marco Rubio has been trying to do, and I thought did quite successfully last night, is say, no. He's just a politician like the rest of them. And then what he had was, as Cruz, I thought rightly pointed out, basically a folder full of opposition research, and he's just sort of rattled through this list of issues from ethanol to legalising illegal immigrants, all these issues where Ted Cruz has been on one or the other side of the issue at different moments. And, it's hard to know how these things play with voters. We'll see in the polls. Certainly Ted Cruz has got the edge on Marco Rubio at the moment, but I thought that was a fairly compelling section of the night for Senator Rubio.
And I thought what was interesting, too, is there's another example of Ted Cruz sort of being taken off message. He's done really well in these debates before because he's been in charge of what he wanted to say. And there were times last night where he was taken incoming from Trump, from Marco Rubio, and from the moderators. And he just was not really in control of the things he wanted to talk about last night, whether he was defending himself on this loan that he took out in the Senate race, whether he was defending himself on the birther thing, and in this back and forth, defending himself on where he stands on the issues. It just was another example of Cruz really playing defense, and it would be interesting to see if this has any kind of negative effect on him moving forward.
All right, Steve, we know you have to catch a flight. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, thanks to Jonathan Swanson in Washington. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still ahead, our Major Garrett caught up with Donald Trump after the debate. Major is standing by in South Carolina. We're back after a quick break.